chief of police sat down with a group of students virtually over Zoom or Microsoft Teams, and just did the most wonderful job of listening to the students' concerns around our campus police and some of their actions, and really sent the message out that I really want to understand. So I think for many mentors, that's what you have to do. And then also, since we've been in COVID and we've all had a ton of virtual meetings, one of the things that I've noticed in just even meeting with my colleagues, how that I love looking at backgrounds, and I mean in people's homes, and it gives you a different sense and a different feel for them. Well, the same way with your graduate students, ask them, what's your prized possession in your home, and really will help you to understand a bit more about them. And then also rules of engagement, I think, is helpful whenever you're on Zoom or you're mentoring or you have a student-professor relationship, is to understand, whether this person is a night owl or an early riser. I have found that some students, they don't want to get a text before 10 o'clock in the morning, and I'm really a night owl. So sometimes I'll send emails late at night. And so you have to understand, do I need to set it so that I go ahead and craft the email and then have it sent at 8 o'clock the next morning? So I think it just is a matter of understanding and not having one size fits all. I think we have to be multimodal in our communication. Some students don't like Zoom. Some would much rather prefer something on the messenger or whatever on Facebook. I'm still learning all the different modes that our students tend to prefer. So I would say be multimodal, but also help students to understand that mentorship is bidirectional. I've never had a mentee that I didn't learn something from. And sometimes it might even start with technology, because I always have the hardest time sharing my screen. So I'll ask students, help me to learn how to share my screen. But, it also helps them to build in the sense that I'm not always dependent on my mentor. My mentor also comes to me. So, and then I just had one more for this question, and that is, the other good thing about our virtual meetings is that we get to see family members, if people have pets, and so the some of the meetings that Dr. Thomas and I are on, we've had so many, you can't help but interact. We have one of our colleagues has a little boy, so he'd come in the room, we interact with him, but it also helps us to understand them better and get a better sense of their individuality.
That's great. I love how the focus is on this individual, trying to find out and making everything approachable. It's so hard to do that in a virtual environment. So it does take an extra effort, something you have to think about. That's very helpful. Thank you. Our third question is going to be directed toward Mr. Batson and Dr. Walker. And here's the question. What are some best practices to mentor today's underrepresented minority graduate students? How can faculty motivate their students in a socially distant environment?
So Bernard, I'll get started. I won't be long-winded, but I'll get us started, because I just happen to think of an example. So I attend a church in Ybor City. And so when we first had to we first started going virtual, I'm like, oh, this is just not going to work. I like to be there hugging my, fellow parishioners and everything. And we went to virtual, they do Facebook Live. And let me tell you, I love it. And here's why I like it, because as an African-American woman, I'm really into call and response. So while the preacher is preaching, I'm in the little chat box and I'm like, amen, I heard that, that's so right. And I find a lot of graduate students of color are the same way. And so find many opportunities for them to respond. So even if it's a professor, a student, you know, in a classroom, but pay attention to the chats because that's where they're really going to be engaging. So, okay, Bernard.
Did we lose him? It's up in the right-hand corner.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I'm new to technology too, even though I work in engineering. So these are really unprecedented times. And so I think one of the positive outcomes of what's happening now with social distancing, I think, is that many of us, many of the graduate programs, especially those that focus on URM, are thinking out of the box about how to recruit students and also how to retain students. So I think, you know, we're being much more, in my opinion, much more intentional in our approach and our focus on recruiting and also retention. For example, there's a lot more discussion now about the GRE, you know, in some of our departments at USF about possibly not requiring the GRE or not looking at it as the sole determinator or indicator of a student's performance applying for graduate programs for this year. One of the concerns I have this year about this upcoming recruitment cycle is that USF has been unique, I think, in the way we have been able to really mentor, retain, and graduate students who, in many cases, probably would not have gone to graduate school, what I call unrealized potential. Uh, and I'm worried about that when we're looking now with this summer, for example, and what's going on, many of our students have not had an opportunity to do undergrad research or to have that full year, that full summer, or maybe this fall. So we have to be more intentional in terms of looking at students, looking at their qualifications, looking at their potential for graduate school. Some of the conferences, well, I would say all the fall conferences this year will all be virtual. So as part of those virtual platforms, there will be opportunities for students to really engage with mentors, to really engage not only with graduate students, but also engage with mentors with the idea those mentors potentially could be advocates for graduate school. So that's really going to be a positive outcome too in terms of recruiting. What we're going to be doing at USF, and I'm sure other universities will be doing as well, is that being intentional. We're really going to go out and reach out to programs at HBCUs and MSIs with the idea of getting our faculty to do virtual seminars, research seminars, so that students will have an opportunity to learn not only about research, but potentially to identify mentors, again, who can be champions, who can be advocates for graduate school, for graduate programs. So we're going to be implementing that this year, and we're very hopeful that whether or not the students will be coming to USF, that will help overall in terms of students applying to graduate programs. So those kind of intentional strategies, I think, is an approach that we should be looking at and more or less targeting with the goal of not only identifying what I would call the student that probably everybody, every graduate program, you know, on paper will look at, but also looking at the other qualities that will make that student a good graduate student: persistence, determination, passion, and wanting really to make a difference.
Great. That's super helpful for us, some suggestions. I wanted to come back a little bit to the notion of mentoring. And we get in our minds sometimes that it's one mentor. Can you all comment on the need for multiple mentors, or how the need for a mentor may change based on your situation in graduate school?
Oh, absolutely, Ruth. Yes, there is a need, and I like to tell my graduate students that you know, you'd be hard pressed to find someone who's excellent at grant writing, as well as being a, you know, wonderful teacher in the classroom, as well as doing community engagement. So I encourage them to, you know, seek out multiple mentors. Find someone who, you know, who is a prolific writer or whatever, publisher that publishes their articles. Have them the mentor for that, but to be able to categorize their mentorship needs. So I think that's an excellent question. Yeah, and I also wanted to add to Bernard's intentionality comments. That's so true. And I like to tell students that we're going to focus on beta building, because one of the things that I found oftentimes for students of color, and particularly African American graduate students, that many times when they exit our programs, their vita looks a bit different than others. They, for a number of reasons, may not have had the same opportunities to write with major printers, to, you know, to go to conferences or whatever. So I like to be real intentional about helping to build their vita. And then my last point is, I think we also have to be really good advocates for students of color, because sometimes they're in a position, there's a power differential, and they can't always politically, you know, advocate for themselves. And sometimes they're fearful of that. And so one of the things that I've considered myself being is a really good advocate for students who may not have the powerful position to be able to do so.
Go ahead.
Well, I certainly advocate for students to have a mentoring team. You know, it's nice for someone, and I tell students at USF, what you really want is have someone that wears your t-shirt, right? So wherever you go, you have advocates in your corner. So I think that is the right approach, because there's no one person can be all things, right, to everyone. So you really need that, you know. So at USF, we actually, with our Sloan grant, have or are implementing what we call a kind of multi-dimensional mentoring model, where in addition to the research advisor, there's also a faculty advisor who can be ostensibly a role model mentor. I borrowed that from a mentor of mine when I was working with the Ronald McNair program at USF, as well as a peer mentor. I heard Dr. Adams allude to that earlier, where essentially when a student comes into USF, they have someone immediately when they arrive at USF who it could be a member of their research group, who can help them in terms of the expectations of graduate school. And that person is probably more than likely, at least in engineering, will not be a person of color, but that's okay, right? Because we have to work together and we have to learn from each other. And the other thing, what we're implementing too, is using our graduates as a way of helping our students, you know, to be introduced at some stage in terms of what it's like outside of, you know, graduate school, as well as that they can do it, they can make it, and they can persist. So having those advocates for our students, I think, is very important. And having that mentoring team, a mentoring circle, really makes all the difference. It takes a village. So I'm definitely in favor of that.
So we had a question within the chat too about perhaps all of you have mentioned these mentoring programs and different ways as to mentor as cohorts. Do you have events or conversations on campus where programs maybe can share their approaches, different ones? I know that at the top, Dr. Thomas talked about things they were doing with incoming freshmen and then trying to model some of those same things with new graduate students. So how are you sort of sharing across programs, perhaps what you're doing in these instances? And then, you know, obviously are some doing a better job than others?
Yes, thank you for that question. In terms of, and as Bernard alluded to, you have what I call ladder mentoring, where some of that is done peer-to-peer, peer-to-researcher, in addition to that. So there are organizations on your campuses, hopefully, and the organization at University of South Florida is the Black Faculty Staff Association. So through the Black Faculty Staff Association, as well as, of course, through the College of Engineering, there's an opportunity to reach out to Black students on campus and bring them all together, and you offer training for the mentees as well as training for the mentors. And you begin to connect them virtually across disciplines or across areas of interest. So there is a mentor interest application that the students fill out, and then they're matched with professionals across the university, and then that relationship begins to flourish and to grow. And that mentoring relationship, of course, can go beyond graduation. But there are organizations on your campuses that are directly and intentionally focused on underrepresented minority students, where you can connect not only through the student organization, but the professional staff, faculty organizations to build those relationships. So that's one example of how you can connect that community.
The thing that I would encourage us to remember too, and it's not part of my bio, but in terms of work that I've done, I've got a current NSF grant where we bring in underrepresented minority PhD students at the proposal or dissertation stage to try to help them get unstuck, right? And so half of everybody who starts a PhD doesn't finish. And then it gets worse for underrepresented minority students. So the thing that I think is helpful for others that have different kinds of programs to remember, it doesn't cost you anything to venture across the aisle to this program or that program or this program or that program. And the more we do that, the more touch points we have with our students and the less reliance it is on your specific program. So if I've got a Bridges to the Doctorate or AGEP or NRT or any of the things that NSF funds that are related to graduate education, I've got students working on an ERC, whether they're minority students or not, they're all gonna have the same issues. So if you're doing something for one cohort or one special program, whether it be the ERC or the Sloan Fellows, invite everybody, unless there's some reason why you can't, you know. And so in my role as interim associate dean at the graduate school at Nebraska, that's exactly how we managed our undergraduate research program. I ran the university-wide program for all, whether it be the sciences, the psychology folks, the engineering people, and I could do some of the common workshops around how to go to grad school, why to go to grad school, how to get ready for grad school. And then the faculty members don't have to worry about that, but all the various programs provided you know, input, a little bit of money, et cetera. So if we collaborate and cross-list our activities, I think it also helps to build a different level of community as well.
That's an excellent suggestion. And it brings to mind to me is how can we help the faculty? You know, what happens is, you know, underrepresented minority faculty are called on a lot to do mentoring. What can we do to share the wealth? What can we do to get more people involved so that it doesn't fall to our new assistant professor in the department and it makes it difficult for that person to get tenure? What are some suggestions that we can do there?
So Ruth, I'll jump out on this one. I think it goes back to what you were asking about the multidimensional mentoring, right? And so I think we have to help faculty understand everybody has something to share and gain and learn, right? So if you approach it from that perspective, then you're reaching out to everybody. You're not just doing your thing, or it's okay to acknowledge what you don't know and let somebody else help you. But until, you know, we keep talking about, and this is the same thing that happened with women through some of the advanced programs, it was always want to fix the woman. right? We got to start fixing the systems. And so if we don't provide different levels of training, if we don't hold people's feet to the fire, so as a department head, you know, it's like every semester we evaluate the graduate students. I wanted to know, when are we evaluating the faculty advisor? When's the last time anybody asked a grad student to evaluate their advisor? Never, probably, right? And no, you have to be careful, because if I am a faculty member and I only have one grad student, and you get sort of negative, you know, information about me, then you know it came from that one grad student. And so you don't want to, you know, put anybody on the spot to be identified. So we started just doing focus groups, looking at the quality of advising. And I think we've got to start doing a little bit more of that in some of these programs than always just trying to fix the student or fix the woman, et cetera.
That is so true. That's one of the initiatives that my office would like to start this fall, is to really evaluate the quality of the advising and to provide support in that area, because it is something that is so needed. Our last question is for Dr. Adams and Mr. Batson, and it's, what are some current strategies that are effective in recruiting and retaining underrepresented minority graduate students?
So I earlier alluded to some strategies, some intentional approaches I think that would be effective. You know, in terms of the GRE, I mentioned that. I mentioned, you know, reaching out, targeting, having a targeted approach, reaching out to universities, minority serving institutions, or those who are leading producers, graduate students, or minority graduate students. I mentioned that. I like the idea of bridge programs. By bridge programs, there are a couple examples. There is the Meharry Vanderbilt, I should say the Vanderbilt FISC Bridge program, where students essentially come into FISC and they are immediately connected with Vanderbilt faculty while they're working on their thesis research at FISC. So there's an overlap there, and they have an opportunity to interact with faculty who can be advocates, and many of those students have transferred and completed their PhDs at at Vanderbilt. But the other types of bridge programs could be where actually you're partnering in some aspect with a minority serving institution. And that minority serving institution could have a master's program, or it could be an opportunity just to interact with the undergraduates. So the undergraduates potentially could be applying for your graduate programs if you're at a research university in R1 institution. So I think those potentially are great strategies for recruiting students. For retaining students, I'm a firm believer in that you need to be connected and make sure the students are connected with each other, and also connected with faculty. You know, it's true, no person is an island. And in graduate school, even before the pandemic, you know, there are many instances where students who felt isolated or feel isolated, you know, they feel that they don't belong in the graduate program because maybe they felt that they weren't as prepared as some of the other students. And so that sometimes has been a challenge. For our Sloan programs, about 5 years ago, we had about around 72% at one point of our students in our Sloan program and our Bridge to Doctor programs who came originally either earned a master's or their bachelor's degree from an MSI. So in some cases, the students felt a little disconnected, at least in their research labs, or particularly maybe in the coursework, you know, in the early stages of the first year program. So I think it's critically important that students get connected, you know, get connected to each other, right? So they're not there's not a feeling that they're doing it by themselves. So things like having, I would say, talks, research talks, you know, periodically, where students get an opportunity, you know, to interact with each other over research. an opportunity to do that. I would say engaging faculty who can do pretty much the same thing sometimes, and not only in terms of talking about their work, but also learning more about them personally, right? You know, and those kind of talks and within departments can be critical in terms of breaking down isolation, breaking down barriers, and things like that, where students feel like they actually belong in the department and that they are valued and they feel welcome. So I think there are a lot of strategies that can be implemented, but I think the key thing is for students to be connected and not feel isolated, whether or not, you know, we're doing many of the activities virtually or not.
So the piece that I'll add to that, and I was trying to choose my words carefully here. So one of the things that a lot of predominantly white universities do is they want to go to the HBCUs and the HSIs and get all their students. And you know, that game's kind of old. So you really need to think about it very differently along the lines of what Bernard was talking about. Let's build a linkage. Let's just not come and pilfer all your students. And so if you look at it, and I know many of you are deans at, you know, you're not engineers by training, so I'm going to use my own discipline. There are only 11 HBCUs that have engineering programs. So, and there's 370 something ABET accredited engineering schools, and probably 200 and something of them are PhD granting. So everybody wants to go to an A&T or a FAMU to get their students. Well, some of those schools have their own graduate programs. So they need to keep some and they need to send some so that their programs can grow and thrive, right? But it can't always be just, we're gonna come and be the savior to fix you, save you, help you, whatever. You gotta approach it from one of a partnership. How can we partner together to create a need that we both have, right? So that's one piece. Then the other part of it, something that I'm doing, and I'm just finishing my first year here at University of Texas, Dallas, but you know, we're looking at holistic admissions. You know, not just the SAT, not just the GRE score or the TOEFL, but looking at the student in total and looking at the contribution. And we had a young man that I was trying to recruit to come here. His dad was a faculty member at my last institution. He had a PhD. The young man was of Hispanic background, a US citizen, but he had gone to undergrad in another country that speaks Spanish. So when he comes and, you know, he brings his GRE score and his TOEFL, they look at it like, oh, he can't do this. But they neglected to look at the fact that he had half a dozen publications already as an undergrad, had been doing lots of undergraduate research. So I think we have to look at this, can't be a numbers game anymore. You know, we have to change the systems. I think along those same lines, you know, one of the things that we've done really well, we have a partnership with the University of Wisconsin at Platteville. So one of our alums has gone there as a faculty member, and every year they bring 6 to 10 kids to UT Dallas to tour and look. And now we've got 8 PhD students from the University of Wisconsin at Platteville. Well, no, that's a majority type feeder, but there are some institutions that are not minority serving that don't have PhDs that have large numbers of minority students. So how do you find that niche that fits you, fits your culture and look and the like? In terms of retention, one of the things that I think, when I think back on my own graduate time at A&M, I had a GAN grant, GAN fellowship, from the Department of Ed. And our associate dean in this College of Engineering created a research seminar and a teaching seminar that pretty much all students who were on fellowship had to take that 1 credit course. Now, why do you do that? Well, first of all, if you're on fellowship, you don't have community anyway. And one of the things that we know about minority students is that minority students oftentimes are on fellowship. So if I come in brand new and I haven't found my advisor yet, I haven't found a lab, I'm just sort of out there flapping in the wind and nobody's touching me. I don't mean in the literal sense of touching, but nobody's communicating with me to make sure that I'm getting linked up. But by having this seminar on research, we talked about, you know, journal articles and grant writing and grant management and et cetera. And then in the teaching, we talked about developing syllabi, and, you know, we were a big proponent of active learning. So how do you incorporate that? And we looked at, again, from the engineering community, but Phil Woncott had a book, Teaching Engineers. And so we looked at that book as kind of a text, but that at least gave us connectivity. And so whether you took it as a first-year student or third-year student, it was another touch point outside of your regular lab where you had an opportunity to engage. And I think the last thing is, I would say to people, and this is my industrial engineering background, you got to know your data. So you have to know how long is it taking students to finish, and you got to decide, is that acceptable or not? And if it's not, then what are you willing to do about it, right? And then understanding, again, the quality of the experience that folks are having. And then the last thing, back to the recruiting piece of it, you know, touching base with some of the student organizations and having high visibility, whether they be in the professional disciplinary type organizations or the specialty, you know, women, minority, et cetera type. How are you getting out and connecting with those entities as well? So I think those are some ideas.
Thank you. These have been incredibly practical and relevant solutions to some of our problems and some suggestions. I really appreciate your input. We have about 5 minutes left. So I wanted to open it up to the audience. If anybody, there's been some really interesting things going on in the chat, but if anybody wanted to ask a question or share some comments, we greatly appreciate it. You've left them speechless.
There was a conversation there in the chat about how we evaluate mentoring and if that is included. I didn't know if some of the attendees beyond the panel wanted to talk about that. I know undergraduate research with faculty is part of that on the undergraduate side for tenure at Furman. I don't know what other graduate programs are doing in regards to mentoring, if somebody from the panel or elsewhere wants to add to that conversation.
So for our programs, from a programmatic aspect, we do evaluations. So we do evaluations. The students are asked to do evaluations of their mentoring, of their overall mentoring, not so much specifically their individual mentor, but just mentoring, climate. We do that at USF for our programs.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure about on the departmental level or on the university level. I can't really say how that's done, you know, for that aspect.
Anybody else evaluating mentoring on your campus? Any suggestions? Okay, very quiet. So I'm going to go ahead and just open it up to our speakers for just the final comment. And what advice did you wish you had when you were a graduate student? What would be the thing that you wish you knew and you could share with your people now?
I'll start. So the famous musician Thelonious Monk said, when they asked him, you know, how is it that you learned to play so well? And he said, well, I learned how to read the notes in between. So for me, in hindsight, I wish someone would have given me more advice on how to read the notes in between. So in other words, how to, you know, understand the political forces in my program, the cultural nuances and all of that. Because by the time I figured some of it out, it was time to graduate.
That's awesome. Anybody else?
So I'll go next. And I don't think it was something I didn't know. I think it was something I knew but didn't do. And that was, we tell everybody, write every day. You've gotta write every day. And so the part of my portfolio that I like the least is the journal article writing. I always tell people, you can give me the choice between writing 1 journal article a year and 12 NSF grants a year, 12 NSF proposals. And I'll take the 12 NSF proposals all the time versus the 1 journal article. And I think a lot of that is just, the nature of how you have to write a journal article versus how you write a proposal. That if I had really been more disciplined as a student writing every day in that scholarly way, I think it would have made a different kind of difference in my trajectory. I don't regret where I'm at, but if you ask me my advice, that would be it. But like I said, I knew it, I just didn't do it.
Anyone else?
Well, I would just say, based on my own experience in graduate school and what I've seen since I've been at USF working with graduate students, really the power of community. Your community, your graduate community, who you surround yourself with, and being connected with them. I think it means a lot and can do a lot for any graduate student. So I certainly, which I had done those things back when I was in graduate school, and I still encourage students now even more so based on my experience.
And I would add to that, bringing all of those together is, from my experience, being able to be a visionary and to be able to bring the complementary pieces together in terms of knowing different mentors from different diverse areas, being able to look at how you manage those communities and those relationships to further advance your research, but also the research that you're going to use to impact society.
Thank you. Such words of wisdom. We really are so grateful that you all have taken the time out today to be with us. I want to thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it over to Jack. And one thing, people want to know how they can get the video. So maybe Jack knows the answer to that.
Thank you so much, everyone. This was just a wonderful opportunity, and everyone really got a lot out of some of these very insightful comments. And thank you just for your willingness to, your collegial, intentional willingness to share your thoughts and experiences with how we can better serve this vital population. The video we will distribute to folks. We can make available on our webpage. It takes a while in order to convert it to the right format, but we can make it available on our webpage as well as push it out to all those that register for the conference. So we can certainly do that. As we wind up here, I just want to remind everyone that our next CSGS forum will be Wednesday, September 9th at 1 o'clock. You can go to the CSGS website, csgs.org website to register. More details will follow about that specific forum. And also, if you have other ideas, especially as we encounter fall and universities are making decisions every day, changing directions, changing approaches, and trying to adapt to the current climate, this will definitely, this opportunity is well served to present everyone with a chance to share what's going on their campuses. But again, if you have ideas and suggestions of future panels, please send those to csgsconference@gmail.com. Give us some feedback on this session, as well as some ideas for sessions to come. But with that, let me just one final time thank you so much to our panelists for joining us. Thank you, Ruth and Troy, for helping pull this together. It was really a wonderful wonderful session, and everyone just left with so many concrete ideas. Thank you so much for everyone's time. I hope you have a wonderful week and rest of August as we get ready for fall.